When the US government moved the Amadea, one of the most expensive yachts in the world, from Fiji to the national city, it had no idea that it would pump millions of taxpayers' money into maintaining it. When the Russia-Ukraine war started in February 2022, we all thought this was going to end almost as quickly as it started. The Russian government, who is pretty much the antagonist in this conflict, suffered several sanctions that ought to pressure Vladimir Putin into ordering a ceasefire. But these sanctions haven't just focused on hurting the Russian government. The US and EU have also imposed strict sanctions on Russian oligarchs. Now, we've got to ask, why exactly does the US and EU impose these sanctions on the oligarchs? They probably weren't the ones who urged Putin to go into a war against Ukraine. But here's how it works. A number of these oligarchs share a close relationship with Putin, and it's impossible to believe that they aren't enablers of Putin's decisions. Basically, it's almost like when a teacher punishes your friends because he just can't seem to get his hands on you. But it gets a little more complicated than that. We also kinda believe that these oligarchs who have investments in real estate, yachts and sports teams are also working for Putin. The US believes that Putin hides some of his biggest assets by having his friends stand as the owner, when in fact it belongs to the Russian president. However, here's the catch. Since there's really no paperwork to determine which of these investments really belong to Putin, the US and EU have no choice but to sanction almost every Russian oligarch. And this is exactly how the Amadea got into the docks of the United States from Fiji. After the war began in Russia and Ukraine, the US Department of Justice made it a priority to enforce sanctions and put several restrictions in place. The DOJ must have thought this would be a simple case of seize and conquer, but ever since May 2022, the Yacht has been nothing but trouble for the US government. It all started when a court ruling in Fiji basically gave the US government permission to seize the yacht and move it all the way to San Diego. After this yacht docked at the national city, the officials quickly discovered what they had on their hands. For starters, the yacht is estimated to be around $300 million, so how did no one realize that a yacht of that standard would require a ton of maintenance? Perhaps they thought they could just lock it away and move it back out after the war. According to a report by Bloomberg News, this yacht is a luxurious haven that requires millions of dollars in maintenance to remain valuable. For instance, the yacht has 2 baby grand pianos, and one of them is completely hand-painted. These pianos have to be cleaned by hand, which suggests that the US government had to employ a full team of staff members to keep the yacht in good condition. And these staff members get paid every month. I know what you're thinking. Why exactly is the US spending so much on a seized yacht when all that money could be used for something else? Well, it doesn't get better. The yacht has a mosaic pool, silk carpets and furnishings, all of which have to be kept in a cold and air-conditioned environment at all times. Since the yacht isn't powered by anything else, it has to generate its power on its own, and that costs an awful amount of money. Coupled with these are a bunch of vague and complicated tasks done by professionals to keep the yacht's sophisticated systems at its best. And again, it still doesn't get better. The Amadea uses one of the most expensive paints for its body, but if this goes unwashed for a very long time, it could require a multi-million-dollar paint job just to get it back to its old glory. So, rather than risk a future paint job, the US spends thousands of dollars each month on washing the yacht, which is 348 foot big. At the end of each month, the US government spends an estimated $1 million on maintenance, and even spent as much as $10 million in the first year of forfeiture. Now, that's an awful amount of taxpayers' money going into the drain. I'm pretty sure there's a number of sectors in the US budget that wouldn't mind an extra $10 mil. Wasting a huge chunk of money on maintenance is definitely one way to get its citizens pissed. The Amadea belongs to a man called Kerimov, the former CEO of Rosneft, a state-owned oil company. Well, at least on paper, the US really believes that this yacht in fact belongs to another man, Suleiman Kerimov, a Russian oligarch who has already been sanctioned due to his close relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is one hell of an accusation, but it's not entirely founded on hearsay. Just before the yacht was seized, the FBI and Fijian authorities spoke and interrogated several crew members of the Amadea, and most of them confirmed that Kerimov and his family used the yacht several times. In fact, one crew member who didn't want to be identified said that Kerimov bought the yacht in a backdoor deal in 2021. Later that year, he came around for an inspection and has been the owner ever since. This was a good case, but there still wasn't enough evidence for the sanction to hold. And Kerimov, the owner on paper, wasn't going to just let the DOJ seize the yacht without a fight. So he got his papers and took them to court. Kerimov's case is simple and straight to the point. He argues that having the yacht docked in the national city is devaluing its standards and even exposing it to unforeseen risks. And he then makes a very valid point. If the yacht had remained in Fiji and placed under restrictions, he would have had to continue paying for its maintenance while the appeal is in court. But the eventual transportation to San Diego put an unnecessary strain on the finances of the US. So does this mean the US could have avoided churning out $1 million each month if they took that way out? Well, it looks like it. The law angle of this case is also a little complicated. Kerimov's petition argues that Fiji law allows the restraint of an asset, but total removal. That's not recognized by Fijian law. Kerimov also argues that the US is seizing a yacht from the wrong owner. But here's the catch. If the US can prove that this truly belongs to Kerimov, then we have to believe a win is lurking around somewhere. What the US wants is a total forfeiture of this yacht worth over $300 million. And if that happens, it should cover every penny they ever spent on maintaining it. However, until then, $1 million will keep going into maintaining a seized yacht in the docks of San Diego. And if the forfeiture never happens, we can say goodbye to the millions of taxpayers' money that has gone with the wind. Do you think this case would drag on for longer since the conflict is still on? Or do you think the US government will back down and just let it go? Let's hear what you think in the comments section. Is this your first time around? We've got more videos like this one. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an upload.